What's a sway bar for on all our cars? Why do I have a sway bar
in the Sienna?
Sway bar in the front. To keep the body level. But what's the real reason to keep the body level? This is the part that most people don't
Control.
understand. Traction. It's all about traction. I can prove that. What vehicle in our lineup has the thickest sway bar for how heavy it is?
No, man.
What car do I want to take out on a racetrack? The Supra. Sway bars are all about traction. When I look at this truck sitting here, these wheels are straight up and down, right? Look at how much rubber's on the ground. So if I'm going straight, dog runs out in front of me, a lot of rubber on the ground, this thing stops pretty well. But if I take a big, tall four-wheel drive truck into a sharp corner at high rate, as that truck lays over, that wheel lays over with it. It takes the wheels with it. Does that make sense? If I take this wheel and lay it over a little bit, how much rubber's on the road? An outside shoulder? Even in a Supra, if I didn't have a sway bar on that Supra, if I went around one of these sharp corners, that big sticky tire would carry me in. But as that Supra laid over, that tire rolls up on that outside shoulder, no grip. Does that make sense? So as a result, the Supra has a sway bar on it almost as big as this truck to hold it flat in the corner. The downside is, if you've ever spent any time in a Supra, what's it ride like?
Feel there is not.
Race car.
Because it doesn't allow the suspension to move. So what gives it better traction, can you imagine trying to cut across a field with it? It'd be like four-wheeling with a sheet of plywood, right? It doesn't give. The whole point of that discussion is every truck we've ever made since we started building trucks has been a terrible compromise. We put a sway bar on it so that we have some traction on the highway when you take a freeway off-ramp. But as soon as we bolt the sway bar to it, we really hurt its off-road capabilities because now we're limiting the suspension. That's why the Supra has such a firm ride, is the suspension doesn't want to move. This is the first truck now that doesn't have a compromise. So you need to understand, when I ask people, why do we put a disconnecting sway bar on it, everybody thinks intuitively it does better off-road. Yes, but because we can disconnect it, it's got a much thicker sway bar, so it actually does better on-road also. This is the funnest little truck we've ever made. It's the best handling on-road truck we've ever made because that big sway bar holds it flatter. And I can do that because I can disconnect it when I go off-road. So how's it work? Sway bar is bolted to the suspension behind the tire. It comes up, goes over, and goes down. It's literally just a big piece of pipe shaped like a U. So it's not fancy at all. This isn't fancy magical engineering. It's a big piece of pipe. And when I go through a ditch or I go into a corner, it just twists that piece of pipe. That's where the resistance comes in. Simple enough, right? So how do we disconnect it? Right in the middle of the truck, we cut it, and we put some splines on both sides, and we wrap it with a collar. So when I'm on road, it's solid. If I'm gonna go off in the dirt, all I do is hit a little button, and that collar moves out of the way, and now it spins freely. Both front suspension is open to moving independently. Make sense? And I can show that it works. Right now, the sway bar is connected. He's gonna pull up this ramp. Look at this gap. This sway bar is really heavy. It's not gonna wanna move very much, so as he pulls up, that gap doesn't change a lot. The cab's gonna fall over, and that rear tire is gonna come up and lose traction. A good sway bar gives you traction on the road. By disconnecting it, we have more traction off-road. So let's see how far he can make it before that tire loses traction. Just watch the rear tire. Pretty simple. Look at this gap. You notice it didn't change very much, right? The sway bar is holding the front suspension stiff. Cab falls over, tire goes up in the air. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Almost to the 6th rib if I look straight down. Go ahead and back up, Mike. So all he's going to do now is just disconnect it. Typical Toyota fashion, cool piece of engineering. All you do is hit the button. The truck should be pretty flat and level. Don't wait till it's twist-fished to try to disconnect it. There's no reason to not have it disconnected as soon as you're in the dirt. As soon as you get off the highway, disconnect it, drive all day. If you forget to reconnect it when you get back on the highway, 30 miles an hour, it connects on its own anyway. I don't want you to go into a freeway off-ramp with it off, right? So it'll connect on its own. but he's disconnected it. Go ahead and pull it up. Let's see what happens. He should make it perfect. You hear that pop? Disconnected. 1, 2, 3, 4, 4.5. Last time he was down here, it pushed it another foot or so up the ramp. You can see the gap's smaller, right? Suspension moved. The cap didn't fall over quite as quick. Pretty simple, straightforward. What I'll tell you is I built this original thing 24 inches high because it's a small truck. Should have been more than enough for any truck I've ever worked with. Damn things are so good we have to stack it on wood to get it high enough. And even on wet pavement and two-wheel drive, it still almost makes it to the top. So if you're going to build something back in the store, it's got to be about 30 inches high for this to work. It moves so much. So that brings me to the next thing. These trucks now are all on coil springs. What do leaf springs do better than coil springs? Why do you think that? You're wrong, but why do you think that? We've always done it, right? But here's what I know. When you look at the big commercial grade trucks, they're all going to coil springs, except for on the trailers because they're trying to save money. That's the only thing leaf springs do better, is they're cheaper to build. So we've always used leaf springs because everybody was using leaf springs, so nobody knew any different. And then a few years ago, Ram put coil springs on their truck, and as soon as they did, customers started realizing how much better they drove. They carry more weight, they move around a lot less when you're trailering, they're quieter, they're smoother, they absorb bumps better, and they give you more articulation. We still offer a leaf spring. Which truck is it? Base cheap truck, right? Leaf springs are just cheaper to make. That's the only reason we're using them. These coil springs do everything better, but they're more expensive. So when somebody says, well, geez, the Tacoma used to be 40 grand. Yeah, they did. They didn't have a disconnecting sway bar. They didn't have coil springs. They didn't have cameras. You need to be able to show them all that stuff. This to me is impressive, how much this tire droops. Wet pavement, steep ramp. It was able to shove this thing. Look how high it shoved this before it lost traction. This is impressive. Go look at the wheel on the other side. Walk around the other side of the wheel. No. So the KDSS, or now the new EKDSS, is a hydraulic system that moves pressure to the shocks and whatnot. This is just a simple coil spring with a simple shock. That disconnect is just a solid bar that disconnects. So it's not fancy. It's just really good at what it does. So who thinks this is impressive on how much this axle moves? You cannot do that with a leaf spring. So when somebody asks me, why is the new Tacoma so expensive? Not that they're pushing back on the price, they just want to know. One of the reasons is coil suspension's relatively expensive to design, engineer, and put on the truck. But here's the advantage. You get this kind of articulation right off the showroom floor. And this isn't just because it's a trail hunter. This would be a TRD off-road or anything. Right? The shocks and the rate that it moves is because of the old man emu, but as far as the actual articulation, it's the coil suspension that's on any of the trucks. And this makes people go, wow. And for 75 grand, you could get a Rubicon Gladiator. Has anybody sold Jeep lately? Anybody worked at a Jeep dealer? Rubicon Gladiator, disconnecting sway bar would look just like this, 75 grand. But here's the difference, same price. We did a Jeep Jamboree last year. They brought in Jeeps from all around the country, like 486 Jeeps. 90% of them were brought in on trailers. And when we asked the owners, you drove out here from Missouri, how come you brought it on a trailer? The two reasons they gave me, terrible on a long drive on the highway and not reliable enough to get there and get back necessarily. So and those are the owners. So if we did that same kind of event and we just invited Tacomas and 4runners, how many would come in on trailers, do you think?
No.
That's the real difference. So there are a few other vehicles out there. The Sasquatch Bronco thing, whatever that thing's called, has a disconnecting sway bar. It can pull up on the ramp and do this. Everybody trailers those too. So when they tell me this is expensive, it's 75 grand, So is the Gladiator, plus a $4,500 trailer, plus a $40,000 Ram 1500 to tow it. This seems like a pretty good deal to do the same thing. And the other thing is, these things are just a lot stronger. You pull most of those trucks up, pull any other brand truck on a ramp and twist it this much, you think you could get the tailgate open? They twist so much, the tailgates hang up. This thing, push the button, it doesn't matter. If I want to open and close the doors, this thing is so rigid, it doesn't change anything. Front and rear doors open, tailgates open, these new electric tailgates. The best thing about this is that really makes me mad that my Tundra doesn't have that feature and we can't backdate it or update it. Buttons on both sides, all of that stuff. If you've got one of these sitting in the showroom and they've disconnected the battery so you can't show them, where the value is on the truck. You need to take 5 minutes, put it on a ramp, show them how some of this stuff works, because when you're off-road, this truck does way better than any other small truck out there. And that's what we want to show you next. So Mike, if you want to back that thing down. So what we're going to do is, with the size of group we have here, we have to drive out there. So if everybody will load the front passenger seat and the rear seats, 2 people per